I thought I married a heartbroken widower who lost his wife in a car crash, but 3 years later, I found her alive in a beach photo with him, laughing like I never existed. Turns out, I was just the cover story in their plan to fake death, commit insurance fraud, and start a new life without me. I was scrolling through David's old phone when I found the hotel receipt from Cabo San Lucas, dated last week when he'd supposedly been working double shifts at the hospital. The room was booked for 2 people, and the signature at the bottom wasn't his handwriting. It was Sarah's, his ex-wife who died in a car accident 3 years ago. David and I had been married for 2 years. I'd met him at grief counseling where he'd sobbed about losing the love of his life in a tragic accident. I was there mourning my father, and his broken vulnerability drew me in. He needed saving, and I needed to feel needed. Classic mistake. The overtime had started 6 months ago. Emergency surgeries that always happened on weekends, medical conferences in cities that never appeared on his hospital's website. I'd been proud of his dedication, even when our sex life disappeared and he started taking mysterious calls in the garage. But there she was in a tagged Instagram photo, very much alive, laughing on a beach with my husband's arm around her waist. Sarah fucking Martinez, the woman whose funeral I'd attended, whose grave I'd visited with flowers because I'd felt sorry for David's loss. The private investigator cost me $2,000 and confirmed everything. Sarah had faked her death to escape gambling debts, and David had helped her do it. They'd been living a double life, meeting in different cities, planning their reunion while I played the understanding wife at home. I defended his mood swings to my friends. He's still processing grief, I'd said when he'd snap at me. Loss changes people. Meanwhile, he was planning vacations with his supposedly dead wife and lying to my face every night. The breaking point was finding their text chain on his iPad. Messages about missing each other, just a little longer until they could be together permanently. Plans to stage his own disappearance so they could start fresh in Costa Rica. I was the convenient cover story, the grieving widower's rebound who'd never suspect a thing. When David came home that night claiming exhaustion from a complicated surgery, I handed him printouts of everything. Flight records, hotel receipts, Instagram photos, their text messages. He went white, then tried to explain like I was stupid. It's not what it looks like, Jessica. Sarah was in trouble, I was just helping her. By marrying me while you were still married to her? I checked the records. Their divorce was never finalized. My marriage certificate was meaningless paper. His face crumpled with panic, not shame. You don't understand how complicated this is. People could get hurt if this comes out. That's when I realized he wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry for getting caught. The man I'd loved, comforted, built a life with was looking at me like I was the problem for discovering his lies. But I had one card left. If Sarah thought she was clever, faking her death and stealing my husband, she was about to learn that secrets have consequences. Insurance fraud is a federal crime, and I had 2 years of evidence that David had been collecting her life insurance benefits. I didn't confront him that night. I smiled and said we'd talk tomorrow, then waited for him to fall asleep before copying everything to a flash drive. The next morning, I mailed copies of our marriage certificate, their text messages, and insurance documentation to Sarah's last known address, the FBI fraud hotline, and David's hospital administration. Then I packed a bag and drove to my sister's house to wait. David called 6 hours later, screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how I didn't understand what I'd done. But I understood perfectly. I'd married a man who was already married, been used as cover for insurance fraud, and spent 2 years loving someone who'd never existed. The FBI raid happened 3 days later. David was arrested at work, let out in handcuffs while his colleagues watched. The hospital suspended him pending investigation. Our joint accounts were frozen as potential proceeds from fraud. Sarah turned herself in 2 days after that, but not before calling me 17 times screaming about how I destroyed her life. Apparently, she'd been working under a fake identity in Nevada, and my evidence package had unraveled everything. Her new boyfriend, her job, her apartment, all gone because she was suddenly a wanted fugitive. My marriage was annulled, not divorced. Annulled, like it never happened. The judge barely looked up when he signed the papers, declaring the union legally void due to bigamy. 2 years of my life erased with a rubber stamp. The house was foreclosed within 6 months. David had been using credit cards to fund their secret getaways, and without his hospital salary, debt collectors circled like vultures. I lost my down payment, my credit score, and had to move back with my parents at 34. The worst part was realizing how completely I'd been played. Every tender moment, every time he'd held me while grieving Sarah, every anniversary dinner where he'd toast to new beginnings had been Oscar-worthy performance. He probably laughed about it with her, sharing stories about his gullible second wife. My friends had tried to warn me that rebounding with a grieving widower was risky, but I'd insisted David was different. He's healing, I'd said. Love grows differently. Now they gave me pitying looks and changed the subject when I tried to explain how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. David got 18 months in federal prison. Sarah got 14 months plus restitution. I got a legal bill for $12,000 and the shame of explaining why my marriage was being annulled instead of dissolved. The grief counseling group kicked me out when the story broke. Having unknowingly participated in mocking a dead person's memory made other members uncomfortable. The place where I'd met David, where I'd worked through real loss, was closed to me because of his deception. I tried dating again, but how do you explain that your last relationship was complete fabrication? That you lived with a man for 2 years who was planning to fake his death to escape you? That you're so bad at reading people, you married a bigamist using you as cover for federal crimes? The private investigator sent me a final report. David and Sarah had been planning the Costa Rica escape for over a year, probably since right after they'd met me. I wasn't just the rebound, I was the mark, chosen specifically because I was vulnerable and trusting and stupid enough to believe their con. David wrote me one letter from prison, claiming he'd really loved me, that Sarah had manipulated him into the scheme. Even behind bars, he was still lying, still trying to make himself the victim. I burned it without reading past the first paragraph. I'm 36 now, living alone in a studio apartment, working a job that barely covers my legal debt payments. I don't trust my judgment anymore, don't trust butterflies in my stomach or the way someone's eyes crinkle when they smile. Every man who approaches me might be running from something, hiding someone, using me for cover while they plan their real life. Some people get cheated on. I got erased from existence, made complicit in federal crimes, and discovered that the deepest love I'd ever felt was for a complete stranger who'd never existed at all.